on today's episode.
I cursed and pulled back on the yoke, hoping with all my might the plane would climb. Climb! My muscles tensed up as chatter from my passengers morphed into screams as we all realized the crash was imminent. The plane began to dive toward the earth, and there was nothing I could do. I kept pulling the yoke as the ground approached, feeling queasy and weak. A thunderous wave of panic came over me as mortality stared me in the face. I wanted to curse the ground for what it was about to do to us. Even with a plane full of people, I felt so alone, so responsible, so hated. Their lives were in my hands, and these hands would let them down, like the many times I let myself down. If you're looking for the best, the most engaging air crash content on the internet, you are in the right place. The cases I present usually have no survivors, so using flight facts and creativity, I take you on the final flight, reimagining what the experience would have been like for someone on the accident aircraft. You won't want to miss this. So, buckle up, put your phone and significant other on silent, and let's delve into the crash that took the life of pop star Aaliyah. The accident occurred on August 25, 2001, shortly after the aircraft departed Marsh Harbor International Airport for the return flight to Opelika, Florida. The flight was expected to be a 165-mile journey that was estimated to take 1 hour to complete. A last-minute change resulted in the accident aircraft being dispatched to Marsh Harbor, Abaco, Bahamas. The Cessna 404 aircraft, which was originally scheduled to conduct this flight, was fueled but subsequently changed to a Cessna 402B aircraft. This is important because the Cessna 404 has a higher useful load, which means it can safely fit more passengers and luggage. The aircraft's weight was estimated to be 941 pounds over the maximum allowable takeoff weight. Black Hawk International Airways was authorized by the FAA as a Part 135 single pilot operation. Mr. Gilbert Chacon was the only pilot authorized by the FAA for Black Hawk International Airways. Once pilot, Luis Morales acted as pilot in command of the Cessna 402B aircraft. It made it a multi-pilot operation. This was a clear violation of FAA regulations. Mr. Morales was not signed off by the FAA to fly for Black Hawk International Airways, nor was Black Hawk International Airways signed off as a multi-pilot operation. Further, they didn't exercise due diligence by looking into his qualifications and background. At approximately 6:45 Eastern Time on August 25, 2001, during a downwind departure on runway 27 at Marsh Harbor Airport, a 9-seat configured Cessna 402B aircraft, registration November 8097 Whiskey, was observed to lift off and climb in a steep, nose-high attitude to approximately 40 feet above ground level. The aircraft banked left, pitched nose down, and impacted marshy terrain in a left-winged, nose-low attitude. The aircraft cartwheeled before coming to rest on an easterly heading 300 feet from the end of the runway. The fatal aircraft debris field covered an area approximately 135 square feet, located on the southern side of the runway. The aircraft was substantially damaged and there was a post-impact fire. All 9 occupants were fatally injured from impact trauma and or injuries sustained in the post-impact fire. Eyewitnesses reported that pilot Luis Morales, the hairdresser, and the bodyguard were alive when help arrived at the accident site. They all later sadly succumbed to their injuries. A forensic report conducted on the pilot revealed that a cocaine metabolite was found in his urine and alcohol was found in his stomach contents. In November 2000, Morales was arrested by Fort Lauderdale police after he tried to return $345 worth of stolen aviation parts to a local distributor. Instead of giving Morales cash, store employees called police, who were investigating a string of airplane burglaries. Mr. Morales was charged with dealing in stolen property after detectives found that a receipt in his bag belonged to the burglary victim who actually bought the parts. An additional charge of grand theft was tacked on when detectives discovered other stolen merchandise. On July 7, 2001, Morales was arrested by the Broward Sheriff's Office in an area of Pompano known for drug sales. A deputy who pulled over Morales' 1993 Volkswagen Fox for running a stop sign said he found pieces of crack cocaine and other paraphernalia in the car. According to the deputy, Morales said he was in the area to buy powder cocaine for a friend. I couldn't sleep that night. So many things were going on. I wasn't feeling like myself. Things were getting worse and worse in my life. I had court in a few weeks after a traffic stop went wrong. My finances were terrible, and I had just been let go by Golden Airways. Thankfully, I found a job almost immediately with Black Hawk Airways. Money was tight, but Black Hawk paid well. If I could get in good with them, save up for a few months, I'd be okay. It was 3 a.m. and I was tired of tossing and turning, trying to go to sleep. It wasn't going to happen. I flipped the blanket off me and went into the kitchen. I opened the fridge and bent over to see what was inside. There was ketchup, mustard, mayo, and relish on a side compartment. In the center of the fridge was a saran-wrapped piece of cake I brought home from a get-together and a package of hot dogs. I grabbed the cake and hot dogs, then closed the fridge. After grabbing a pot and filling it with water, I placed it on the range. Within 2 minutes, it was near boiling. I placed the hot dogs inside the pot. While waiting for them to cook, I sat down at the table. In front of me was the piece of wrapped chocolate cake with coconut icing. Within arm's reach was a flat bottle of Coke and a bottle of gin. A drink would help take the edge off. When the hot dogs came to a boil, I got up and put them on a plate. Before sitting back down, I grabbed a cup. I was surprised when my boss told me I'd be piloting Aaliyah. I'd heard her name for years. True, I didn't know what she looked like or could name any of her songs, but I knew she was a somebody. I poured my drink, making it nice and strong, just the way I liked it. I spent about 2 hours before bed reading articles about her and listening to her music. It was good. Not typically what I listened to, though. I wondered if she needed a private pilot to take her places. Maybe I could build her trust and become part of her team. I was good at what I did, and if she felt at ease with me, then this could lead to new opportunities, even better paying jobs. The thought gave me jitters. I took a healthy cup of my drink and pondered my future. If things went well with Aaliyah, maybe I could give her my info and she could pass it along to her rich and famous friends. I was sure some of her friends, actors, musicians, they routinely flew private jets. Maybe I could be their pilot. I could call my own shots, do what I wanted. This could be the beginning of a new, better life for me. Wait and see, I told myself. That morning, the owner of Black Hawk Airways, Gilbert Chacon, sent me an email and stated I would be flying a different plane and it would not be ready until the evening. I wasn't sure why the switch was made, but I didn't question it. My job was to fly. How they ran their operation was their business. I was familiar with the new aircraft. I had flown it much more than the Cessna 404. The 402B was smaller, though. I hoped there wasn't a lot of equipment and passengers. There was tension from the moment I arrived, which is exactly what I did not want. My boss told me that Aaliyah wasn't a big fan of flying in small planes, so make things as comfortable for her as possible. I understood what that meant. It meant don't say the word no, and an uneventful flight is a good flight. It was 6:15 when I arrived at Marsh Harbor. A van taxi pulled up shortly after I shut off the engines. 2 airport baggage handlers also came over on a utility vehicle filled with bags and equipment. The passengers got out of the van taxi. A blonde came up to me and it was clear she was not happy. "What the hell? You were supposed to be here 2 hours ago," she exclaimed. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. We had to change aircraft. We will get you loaded and off shortly. No worries." She seemed satisfied with that. The baggage handlers began loading the plane. I went over to inspect the utility truck to see how much stuff they had. When I saw all the bags and equipment, plus the full load of people going inside, my heart sank to my stomach. We weren't going to be able to fly. There was no way the plane was going to get off the ground with all this weight. It wasn't going to happen. I went back over to the blonde lady and the entourage, which included Aaliyah. "I think you have too much equipment and bags. Unfortunately, you're going to have to leave some stuff behind. I can let my boss know, and he can make arrangements for the rest of the equipment." The blonde lady gently grabbed my arm and walked me about 15 feet from the others. "When we came, all of this fit onto the plane. That means all of it can fit going back. There's nothing new that we didn't have coming in. It's not like we went souvenir shopping and now there's all this new extra weight. You're not making sense, Louis. I wasn't working at Black Hawk when they came to the Bahamas a few days earlier. I wasn't sure what plane they came in, but if it was the same plane, then I guess she was right. I felt uneasy as I observed the baggage handlers continue to load the aircraft. We can take everything, but this isn't safe, I said. She nodded and walked back to her entourage. They were pressed for time, so I decided to scratch the pre-flight checklist. It would add more time, and I was already holding them up. I followed the blonde lady back to the entourage and made eye contact with Aaliyah. I wanted to let you know, you're in good hands. I'm the best pilot around, I said. She smiled. I sure hope so. Just get us there safely, she said. There was a hint of anxiety in her voice. I started to change course and ask if she minded if we left some equipment behind. It would make the trip a lot safer. The blonde lady must have sensed my trepidation. Thanks, we appreciate you, she said before turning to Aaliyah and discussing dinner plans. I took that as my cue to get lost. When the baggage handlers were done loading, passengers began filing onto the plane. It was time to take flight. One of the engines was slow to get going, but once it roared to life, we were all set for takeoff. I have to be honest, I had a bad feeling from the moment we started to taxi. But long ago, I stopped following my gut. When I was a teen, I remember going to a party with a few of my friends on a different side of town that I wasn't familiar with. On the way into the party, I saw some guys I had problems with. I don't think we should stay. I've got problems with some of these guys here, I told my friends. It'll be fine. Nobody's gonna mess with us, my friend said, flexing his muscle. And that's exactly what happened. Nothing. We partied, we drank, and we went home. It was one of the best nights of my life, and it wouldn't have happened if I'd followed my gut and left. That's the exact day I realized my gut instinct was often wrong, and listening to it wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. Maybe if that night had ended badly, I would have trusted my gut and not taken off. Even the taxi to the runway felt off. The plane felt so heavy. Everything felt slow and labored. But once we got off the ground, it would be fine. I knew it. It would fly great, and in an hour, we would be in Florida. I'd give Aaliyah and the blonde lady my info, and maybe it would lead to something in the future. Heavily weighed down, we managed to get off the ground, but 40 feet into the air, it refused to climb anymore. I cursed and pulled back on the yoke, hoping with all my might the plane would climb. Climb! My muscles tensed up as chatter from my passengers morphed into screams as we realized the crash was imminent. The plane began to dive toward the earth. I kept pulling the yoke as the ground approached, feeling queasy and weak. A thunderous wave of panic came over me as mortality was quickly approaching. I wanted to curse the ground for what it was going to do to us. Even with a plane full of people, I felt so alone, so responsible, so hated. Their lives were in my hands, and these hands let them down, like the many times I let myself down. One of the main things that stood out to me was the incompetence of the record label. They didn't seem to properly vet the people they were doing business with. Once the contract was signed, I'd be interested to see if they continued to monitor the situation, meaning, did they make sure the registered pilot was the one flying? Did they have any protocols in place to make sure the airplane they contracted for was the one that actually showed up? It's certain this pilot had his issues in life, but blame should be apportioned to those who were adamant about this plane taking off. The entourage Aaliyah was with were not pilots and likely didn't understand the mechanics of flight. In everyday life, we exceed limits, and things work out perfectly fine. In aviation, that's asking for your aircraft to come back to Earth in an unsurvivable event. You can't overload a plane. You can overload your car, you can overload your body with alcohol. In most instances, you'll just throw up and be hungover the next day. You can overload your body with food and you'll just gain weight. You can exercise it off at your discretion. But you can't do that with flight. I don't think these people really knew what they were getting into. If they had, of course, they would have left the equipment behind. That's a no-brainer. This case brings to mind that of Emiliano Sala, where an unqualified pilot made mistakes and ended up crashing into the English Channel. The pilot in this case, Luis Morales, should not have been the one to make the final decision because he was not qualified. His hours of flying time are grossly inflated and he was having trouble in his personal life, which included using illegal substances. That is not the person that should make the final decision with other people's lives. Sometimes you have to say no, and having a celebrity that's eager to get home is a tough situation. But you are the pilot in charge for a reason, and even if everyone is against you, it's your final call. What an experienced pilot would have done, or any good pilot, was do a weight and balance calculation. He should have known exactly how much weight was on the plane. That way, he could have went to them and said, "Look, we're 900 pounds overweight," and simply explain that a little overweight is okay, but grossly overweight is putting their lives at risk, and he wouldn't do that. He could have then pointed out some things that needed to stay behind. Most of the things could go, but maybe a few pieces of equipment could stay behind and make the flight much safer. More than likely, a little bargaining would have taken place, and a few of the overweight items would have made it on board, but they would have still been within the limits of flight. Aaliyah was a very talented artist with great things ahead of her. The same can be said for the other 8 aboard this aircraft. This was a devastating event, but her music and legacy lives on. Thanks for watching another episode of The Final Spin.